Mark Liphardt's talk on privacy, and it'll be awesome, don't worry. There's no drones involved, but it'll be amazing. After this, in this room, is the closing ceremony, so stick around if you'd like to see more DG open mic. And after that, we're going to the 23 Shop After Party in Fullerton. If you're looking for a ride, there's some people offering rides in the hallway, many seats available, so figure it out in the hallway. Ask me if you need to be pointing in the right direction. But without any further ado, we have Mark Liphardt talking, does privacy really matter anymore?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's a tremendous introduction there. Thank you all for coming. There's plenty of empty seats up front. You know, come up. We won't be smashing watermelons or anything too dangerous here today. So. When I got the idea to do this talk, I thought, you know, I've got this idea, and I can probably do a talk in an hour for it. And then I thought, okay, well, I got a beginning, middle, and end. I kind of had the beginning. I thought I had some middle. I really didn't know where I was going with it. But a couple of days ago, I finished all the slides, so I guess I got to do it. Anyway, there was a lot of stuff, and I couldn't fit it all into the hour, so I think I kept the best, and I threw out all the rest, and hopefully you'll feel the same way. So anyway, well, let's get started. So, does privacy really matter anymore? Perception versus reality. And so the question is privacy important to you, and why? Can we put it on a scale of 1 to 10? Can we measure it in some way? I mean, this would seem like an easy question to answer, but it's actually a rather complex question. And while in some cases it might appear to be obvious, in other situations it's not so much. So it's not always black and white. In fact, as you'll find out, often it depends. So let's start out with people. You know, in the industry here, we think of, well, we can differentiate between privacy and online security. You know, we think in a more detailed, but you know, the mere mortals out there, the average person, they kind of don't do that. They kind of combine those two things into one. So in focus groups that were done, respondents pretty much echoed that feeling. And, you know, these questions, sounds like it's the same, looks like the same to me. So for the purpose of today's talk, we'll kind of follow that definition. We'll be using the terms interchangeably. Okay. All right, so let's look at the state of privacy today. And whether it's retail stores tracking customer shopping habits, or online services and applications that, you know, give you stuff for free but then want to target some ads to you. You know, Americans regularly face the choice of, is it worth handing over my personal information for something I'm going to get in return? Okay? So I went trying to look in and find some answers to this question. And there's a lot of different research being done out there, but I came across a group that's pretty well respected. You may have heard of them. It's called the Pew Research Center. And if you don't know them, they're a nonpartisan fact tank that deals with issues and attitudes and trends that shape America and the world. And for the past 3 years, they've been doing surveys and have tried to map this landscape and the nuanced feelings that Americans have regarding privacy and insurance, and surveillance, I mean. Insurance, that's a Freudian sleep of some sort. So anyway, exploring these things, they did a number of surveys, and they did some focus groups to get some real in-depth insight into that. And I'm going to borrow some of the better parts of that information and present that today to give you a feeling on, you know, how this is really shaping up in the world. And my goal here at the beginning is to kind of establish a baseline on expectations. What do people really feel about some of these issues? And then we'll work from that to see how those things are being met. We're going to cover a few of the recent, legal events or changes in some laws. And then we're going to look at things that are happening in the world at the moment that affect this. And then we're going to use the crystal ball to look a little bit into the future and see where things might be going. So with that, let's start with the first scenario here. Okay, so here's the scenario. The office surveillance. Some people in the company, there were some theft issues, and so the company says, well, we're going to put up some cameras that use facial recognition, and we're going to try to see and spot and recognize who those bad guys are. You know, that sounds like a good thing. But then, you know, this idea works so well that we're going to keep those things up there, and we're going to, you know, be able to monitor the workplace, and see how performance is on workers and things like that, and so on. So is this something that would be acceptable or not acceptable, okay? And as they found, a lot of people said, 54% here said, that's kind of acceptable to me. I can deal with that. 24% said no. And the other thing that happened was a number of those people, when it came down to security, the ones that said yes were kind of pro on the security aspect to it, but on the performance review, well, that was kind of a no. They felt that that was overstepping the original intention of this thing. So yes, we want to stop crime, but no, I don't want you to follow me around, or we don't want cameras in the bathrooms and, watching me work and seeing if I'm lazy or if I'm playing solitaire. It's kind of overstepping the line. So those are some of the things that came out in that scenario. Now, what else have we got here? Let's look at this. How about health information? You got HIPAA compliance, all sorts of laws to protect things, but in this case, a doctor's office created a website, and the idea was to help manage patient records. And in doing that, if you participated, you'd have access to your records easily. You could look at those things. You could see the lab reports coming back. And, it would kind of speed the process in some sense. Well, pretty much by a 2-to-1 margin, people found that acceptable. 52 to 26% Americans were willing to accept that. Now, some 20% say that, the scenario would depend on particular circumstances, and a lot of those things would be related to how this information is being used. But the other difference was that people, say, age 50 and older, were more likely to say this was acceptable than people younger than 50. It seemed to be that people with a higher education were more likely to accept this than those without a high school education. So there are a few demographic differences in that regard. But few people thought that the trade-off was unacceptable. Some people issued some concerns that, hey, it's another website to be hacked, and that could be a problem. One comment was, well, if it is, I'd rather lose my medical record than my banking record, which, I don't know. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but, you're getting comments all over the place with this type of idea. So let's look at something else. Next scenario. Here's one that we probably already do something about. Oh, wrong way. Let's go that way. There we go. Customer loyalty cards. How many people here use, that card at the Ralph's or the Vons? Show of hands if you're one of those people. Okay, quite a few of you, right? And, same thing here. We found that, almost half the people, 47%, said that was acceptable and that it was worth doing for the bargains that they could get. People pretty much thought that was a good thing, although there was some concerns with the unacceptable group that, they took exception to the idea that their data was being collected. They didn't like the idea that it would be sold to third parties, and they also expressed some concern about getting unsolicited telemarketing calls as a result. Okay, so, but most people seem to be accepting the idea, and as shown by the hands in this room, we all kind of do some of that. Here's an interesting one. Auto insurance. Imagine the following scenario, if you will. Your insurance company decides that they want to offer you a discount, but to get the discount, they want to put a GPS type of monitoring device in your car to, track your driving habits, see how you're doing, reward good behavior type of thing. In fact, back in 1998, Progressive Insurance started offering people a chance to install this telematics device in their cars to track their driving behavior, and they offered discounts to those that, performed well, so to speak. That went along for about 15 years. Then in 2013, they changed the system a little bit, and they started charging poor drivers higher rates. So that wasn't a great idea. Anyway, in general, most people found this is not acceptable. They didn't like the idea of being tracked. They didn't like the idea of knowing where they went at any particular time. I mean, there was certainly a group that was agreeable to this, and they would make comments to the effect that they were good drivers, they had good habits, and they deserved to be rewarded for that. So they welcomed this type of system. However, others felt that, you know, I like to speed sometimes, and, you know, maybe this isn't the great idea that's going to help me so much. So they were a little divided there, but most people kind of were creeped out by the idea of tracking where they're going. And probably most people in this room would be creeped out at tracking where they're going. So, all right, so what are the scenarios we got here? Free social media. Well, not a new idea, but in this case, the scenario was presented that a high school was trying to get together for reunions, to, you know, 10-year reunion or something. And they wanted to create this website, and you could subscribe to that, and you could share your information, upload your picture. You could connect with, you know, your old high school pals and stuff like that. Pretty much this one kind of got shot down. 51% said non-acceptable to 33% saying it was good. The biggest difference in this pertains mainly to age. People that didn't like social media, well, let's see. Under 50, about 40% said, yeah, this would be acceptable. Over 50, about 24% said this would be acceptable. And part of the problem with this question, they think, was that, especially among those people that didn't use social media much, then generally disliked social media, that may have colored the responses to the question. In general, people felt that they wanted to use existing systems rather than get into adding their information to one new system. The trade-offs really didn't seem to be a great idea. And, you know, it was unacceptable in that regard. Other people said that, hey, those guys in high school haven't contacted me in 10 years. They're a bunch of losers. I don't care to connect with them anyway. So, you know, that was a no-go. How about the Internet of Things thing? Okay, so smart thermostats, right? So here's the deal. Power companies got smart thermostat technology. They want to put that in your home. Then doing so, they want to be able to monitor as you're moving around the house, see what's happening there, what your energy uses are. You know, maybe at night, everybody's in the bedroom. They turn down the heat in the living room and other areas, and they turn up the heat in the bedroom, make it comfortable in one place, do some energy savings. Surprisingly enough, 55% of the people thought that's not going to be acceptable. About 17% of the "it depends" were mostly what are they going to do with the data, how long are they going to keep it, you know, who's going to have access to it, and things of that sort. Other people just objected to things being captured about their movements in their home. It was like, it's my space, it's my castle, you got no business being here, and if I want to manage my heating and remotely managing it, I can arrange that for myself. So this was kind of a thumbs down. All right. So are we finding any themes here so far? Well, let's see. Mostly, we're finding that not all information is created equal. I mean, as far as the sensitivity people have to that. So the Holy Grail, Social Security numbers, the identity fraud, thieves, golden egg, that's something we universally want to protect. Other things like, you know, my shopping habits or what am I listening to on Spotify, things like that, not such a big deal. I don't care. All right. So people have lots of personal information, but they obviously, depending on the situation, value that information in different ways. Okay? And the focus groups went on to try to dig into some of these things and see what some of the major concerns were. And this word bubble here kind of shows that what sort of terms seem to come up. And, you know, there's secret, the right to keep hidden things hidden, you know, a number of areas there. In the post-Snowden era, when many of the citizens learned that, gee, there's a whole lot of spying going on here and collection of data that we never even thought, I just thought it was a TV show thing, but no, it's really happening. Well, that kind of changed the national perception and the talk in these areas. Most Americans, close to about 80%, agree that citizens should be concerned about the government monitoring programs. and particularly the government monitoring phone calls and internet communications. Only about 18% disagreed with those things for some reason of their own. And an overwhelming majority of Americans sense that they have a loss of control over their personal information, how it's being collected, how it's being used, and they really feel that there should be greater regulation on the part of advertisers as to how they handle their personal information. Now, people have their own methods for posting content, whether they're using their real name, screen name, or some anonymous posting, but that seems to change from time to time based on the venue and the information they're sharing. So once again, different information seems to have different values to us, okay? So, water break. All right, so now we got, so hopefully now we got a little better feel on the complexity of this issue and some of the trends on how people respond to those types of choices that they're having to make on a pretty much daily basis. So now I want to go into some of the recent changes in laws. Now, there's a lot of laws that affect privacy, okay? But I'm just going to take a couple of the most recent things that have happened here. One is the Gdpr that just went into effect on Friday, and probably a lot of you, I know most all of us, have been receiving a slew of emails over the last couple of weeks of, hey, you want us to keep receiving junk from us? Sure, click here, and so on and so forth. So, show of hands, is there anybody in here working for a company that's been dealing with this GDPR thing? Any of you guys been involved in that? A few hands in the back, a little bit. But you've all gotten the emails, right? Yeah, okay, so we all got that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what GDPR, and let me give you a brief overview on what it is, okay? So this is a new regulation that replaces the Data Protective Directive, okay? It's a law that had been around in Europe for about 20 plus years, and in general, Europe has had greater privacy protections than we have in the United States. I don't know, I'm not sure what to account that for, but I think that, during those early years, the World War IIs and things like that, when there was a lot of persecution over there, that they figure the less they know about me, the better. And maybe that concept is carried forward and affected the development of a lot of their laws. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, it's a European Union law, and its idea is to deal with data protection and privacy for all individuals in the European Union. Now, and this also addresses the export of their data outside of the EU. In addition, why it may be affecting companies in the United States is because it also reaches out to impact companies that are dealing with individuals in the European Union. So if you're doing business there, if you're dealing with their data, you're going to have some requirements to this, okay? So, not to get into the minutia here about this, but the GDPR is basically made up of the main part of it is this 173 recitals that make up the body of the thing. And just to give you a feel for one of those, the first one is kind of cool. First one says, data protection as a fundamental right. Protection of natural persons in relation to the processing of personal data is a fundamental right. I think it's a pretty good idea. And everyone has the right to the protection of their personal data concerning him or her. This is not a bad idea to have here in the United States. I don't know. Usually we're leading in California. Why didn't we think of this, huh? So, other things going on with it. In many services, you're automatically opted in. Under this system, you're automatically not opted in. You have to specifically choose. You also have the right to know what is being collected and how that information is being used. Furthermore, you have the right to get a copy of the data that's held by these entities, and a unique new thing, the right to be forgotten. So you can just say, hey, lose my number, forget about it, and all my data. And that's kind of cool. And those are some of the challenges that these companies are having, is being able to construct their systems in such a way to allow them to do this. You have to You have to group information. You have to take information in. If you want to look at information, you can look at it in a group. You know, like I could say, I want to know all the orthopedic surgeons that are male between this age that live in, you know, Nevada or something. But I can't zero in on Bob in Reno per se. The information can't be stored or available in that fashion. So this is giving some headaches to companies that have to rethink their software and their database structures to try to accommodate and allow them to do that. Okay? So a couple things going on there that you may not have heard. Now, GDPR tries to be a very wide-ranging thing. So it deals with, you know, it casts a wide net in trying to deal with privacy issues. And there's fines involved as well. In fact, yeah, there's some serious fines involved. And we'll talk about that. So one of the compliance problems here, as I mentioned, anybody that deals with the European Union has to comply with these rules. And if you don't, potentially, you could be fined up to 20 million euros, or 4% of your global revenues. Not just your European, not just American, your global revenues, whichever one's greater. So I mean, if you're Facebook or Google or one of these big players, that could be a lot of money, okay? So they've been working on this for a while, and it's still a problem for many of them. There's some workaround things because you have to, if you're processing the data, you also have to get permission for that. And there's a element called legitimate interests basis. And the idea behind that is if you've got something that, well, you have to define a legitimate interest. You have to show that processing is necessary to achieve that interest for the individual. And then you have to balance it against the individual's individual rights and freedoms and interests. So it makes things a little bit more complicated. You just can't decide, hey, we're going to process this data this way and do this thing with it without consent if you can pass those tests. And because this thing is new and none of these things have really been litigated yet, you know, there's a lot of gray areas there. So if a company's trying to say, hey, we can just keep doing what we're doing more or less, and we're going to use the legitimate interest basis, that may come back to bite them later. So it's still a few confusions there. All right, so what else is this cost? Well, it's also caused, as you can imagine, some casualties. In fact, right here in Los Angeles, the LA Times is now blocking users from the European Union. They can't do the things they need to do, so their solution and the solution of a number of other companies has been, well, you just can't go here anymore. Okay? But worse than that, for some companies, it's actually putting them out of business. There was an app called Instapaper that Pinterest owns that's shutting down. There was a it's called Street Lend, which is kind of like a Craigslist sort of thing where neighbors can say, hey, I need to borrow a rake, or, you know, do you have a drill, or, you know, what have you, and they can mix those things. Now think about it for a second. Now you're exchanging personal information about the neighbors without explicit permission. So that idea and that model, the way they had it set up, violated the thing. And so they completely decided, well, we're not going to fight it, we're not going to risk the fines, so I guess we're shutting down until we think of something else. So not only can it be costly for non-compliance, but it can be very costly to set this up. Oh, you have a question, sir. Go ahead. You know, I don't think so. Let's face it, if you came in on a VPN and I said I'm living in California instead of in London, you know, that's going to be a thing. Often in the law, when you're litigating things, there's a concept of making a good faith or a best effort. You know, if people try to fool you and all that, you can't really be held liable to somebody that's going out of their way. You're doing your part, they're going out of the way to subjugate their own protections. So it's hard to hold you liable to that. I would suspect that those arguments would be made. So, let's see, did I get up here? No. Okay. So, costly. Well, how much does it cost? Well, here's an idea. Some people it's cheap, but for others, they might be spending over $100,000 to $1 million, and in some cases over here with the this little sliver of 10%, $1 million plus. I think that's the guys with the billion-dollar exposure to fines, probably. So there's a lot of changes going on with this new law. And as I said, it just went into effect on Friday. Okay, so that's what's happening. That's a little snapshot of Europe and recent things. What's happening here locally? Well, anybody here heard of a thing called the Cloud Act? No. Okay. A lot of head shaking here. A lot of head shaking. Okay. All right. So the Cloud Act, or the Clarifying Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act. Who comes up with these things? They really needed something that would spell out cloud. Anyway, so has anybody heard of the Stored Communications Act? If not, I'll tell you a little bit. Stored Communications Act allowed federal law enforcement to compel technology companies and, basically with warrants and subpoenas to get information that's stored on their servers. The Cloud Act, it was actually information at rest. The Cloud Act expands that to allow them to request information stored on servers wherever those things are. So Google might have servers around the world, and previous to this, there was a regulatory boundary or a jurisdictional boundary where you couldn't go outside the country because that's not your jurisdiction. So they couldn't reach that. And also, this thing started by, well, actually, this was proposed in 3 different bills by Senator Orrin Hatch, and they didn't get them passed. And when the Republicans took control of Congress, they combined all those bills into one big badass bill, and they crammed it through. And so what we now have is the Cloud Act. And with the Cloud Act, there was a famous case with the FBI and Microsoft. They were chasing a drug trafficking investigation back in 2013, and the FBI says, hey, we want this data, and Microsoft says, hey, it's in Ireland on servers there, we can't give it to you because we'd be violating privacy rights over there and so forth. And so it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it was about to be heard this year when the Cloud Act passed and made that whole argument a moot point. So they dropped that, and now they have the ability to go to Europe or to go anywhere else and to get that sort of data. Now, obviously, the bill gives law enforcement a tool that they wanted. And the second part of the bill allows the president to enter into executive agreements with foreign governments that would allow each government to acquire users' data stored in other countries without following each other's privacy laws. So this is like a loophole around everybody's privacy laws. This is like the secret, I'm going to pass you the data thing, okay? So as you can imagine, a lot of privacy rights groups have said that this is a problem, because depending on how they enter into these agreements, you could have foreign governments that come in that want to monitor dissidents or follow their citizens and so on, and they can request this data and get it sent to them without any due process of law. Those, unlike a warrant or a subpoena where the party being subpoenaed is going to get notified of that, you wouldn't know this was even happening. Okay, so there's some real problems here with this in potentially in citizens' rights. Okay, so those are a couple of things happening on the legal sphere. So what's happening here in the real world today besides this, okay, that might be affecting privacy rights? Well, let's look at a couple items. Anybody aware of the Postal Covers program? Postal Covers is where the post office is photographing your mail, not the inside, but the send, the to and from on the mail, packages, letters, what have you. And this was something that was started a number of years ago when there was this anthrax scare where somebody was sending poison powder through the mail, and they wanted to find out a way to track this, and so they started this program. Well, the anthrax thing is over, however, the program never went away. They just decided that this could be useful. And in fact, if law enforcement wants to get access to this, all they do is fill out, it's like a 2-page form they fill out, and they get their supervisor to sign off on it. And there's tons of these requests that get processed over the years. Okay? So that's a little concerning. License plate cameras. Anybody seen the license plate cameras on the police cars? They've got them, you'll see them on the top on the light bar, and they'll be kind of angled out to the side, so as they're driving, they can see the cars on either side. They'll have them behind there. And that picks up all that information and feeds into a large database. In fact, in the Bay Area recently, they proposed that they put these things on garbage trucks so that every day they'd be combing through the city and adding to that database. Okay? That's a little creepy. I don't know about you, but Stingray's cell phone intercepts, we know that's being used here in LA and in other areas. And big data analytical services. How can I put together all the pieces? You know, you watch those CIA spy movies and they got the screens all over the walls and there's stuff coming in from here and yeah, that kind of stuff, okay? It's helpful for some things, but we want to make sure it can't be used against us. So, oh, and there's a thing called the expectation of privacy doctrine. So how do they get away with taking pictures of your license plates and the postal covers and that sort of thing? Isn't there a law to protect you against invasion of privacy, you know, like the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizure things? Okay. So there's this concept called the expectation of privacy. When you're driving down the street in your car, you have no expectation of privacy that somebody can't see you or take a picture of you or your license plate for that matter. The same thing as mail going through the system. You really have no expectation of privacy there. So this expectation of privacy doctrine is something that they use and or abuse in a number of ways to get around due process of law and potentially Fourth Amendment rights. Okay? So, okay, let's drill down, let's get a little more fancy stuff going. What else cool is happening? There's a thing called the LASER program. Now, the LASER program is kind of a combination of these things plus about 15 different database sources. So they call it LASER because it's able to zero in on problem hotspots and things. But the civil rights people say, well, it's really useful for, you know, keeping a brother down because once they get somebody, then they keep watching them, they keep arresting them. And then while it may be helpful in some areas, you know, it's prone to abuse. And interesting enough, you don't need, forget Kickstarter. This thing was funded by the CIA's venture capital arm. You didn't know the CIA had their own VC fund, did you? Pretty cool, huh? So, yeah, if you got some elite tech, they might be interested. So, and the laser system isn't transparent. There's no oversight. There's nobody watching the watchers, okay? So we're getting a lot of these technologies that are floating around, moving very fast, and yet nobody in control of them, nobody really understands the implications, and so consequently a lot of this stuff is running wild on its own. All right? Well, okay. So how about some other cool stuff? Here's an idea. There's a concept called a reverse search warrant. Now, police in Raleigh, North Carolina tried this thing. They, you know, they had a stalker and they had some other cases. And the idea here was, what they did was served a warrant on the service provider to say, in this neighborhood, give me all the cell phones that were there, all the signals you had. Who were all those guys? Okay? So now normally a warrant you have to have probable cause. You can't just say, hey, we're going over to Larry's and search your shit. Okay? You got to have a reason to go in there. And you got to be very focused. And the warrant says, we're there and we're looking for this and only this. And if it's not on the warrant, you can't go search for it, right? Well, this is a completely different idea. This is like, let's go fishing and get a big net and see if any of those things are of interest to us. So that's a real interesting thing, and it's showing up on Google's transparency report that they're getting a lot more requests for that. But literally, you get GPS tracking information. You get a lot of things that can be putting the pieces together. You're broadcasting a wide net, so you're picking up people that shouldn't be involved in your investigation indiscriminately, and you know, this certainly could be a problem. I don't know. Does anybody else feel that way? Well, a few heads nodding. Okay. All right, so that's a little glimpse of some of the things. Do you have a question, sir? Oh, no. Oh, no. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. There's the due process of law that you would normally get. When you get served with a warrant, they walk up to the knock on the door and go, boom, warrant. You get served with, if you're being compelled for production or something with a subpoena, same thing. You get a subpoena. With a subpoena, you have a certain amount of time to quash that subpoena. You have You normally have about 10 days, okay? But you have to act quickly on it. There are subpoenas that we can use in cases where you don't have that. It's called an ex parte subpoena. To get that, you have to go before the judge before 10 o'clock in the morning. You have to present, you know, the names of who's involved, and you have to have a situation where there's imminent danger, and they use them in domestic violence. We use them in forensic investigations because the data can disappear very quickly. If I tell you we're coming to get it, you're going to hit delete and destroy it. You're going to do a bunch of things to try to do that, okay? So there's instances of that. But in general, yeah, you do get notice on these, and you do have responses to them. This, you don't get any of that. They get everything, you get nothing. So, I don't know. We're reversing a few things there, right? Yes, sir.
Was that laser program based on person of interest, or was it vice versa?
The laser program is a very broad-based intelligence gathering tool at the street level that's applied to areas of high crime potentially. I mean that's the plan. But in doing so, they're getting feeds from multiple databases, the cameras and a number of other things. So you can use it to track people. You can use it to do a lot of things beyond, just stopping crime. So, well, yeah, in that case, think of like, what's that movie where they had pre-crime, Minority Report? Where they're trying to project things. So in this is kind of a step in that direction where they're going, well, these are areas that we want to have extra views on. We're using predictive algorithms to determine where likely certain types of crimes are going to occur in those areas, and individuals that have a high probability of being involved in some way with those actions based on previous convictions and or associations. It's getting kind of deep. So, yeah, so...
Person of interest.
Right. Yeah, but the problem is these are things happening now, so it's science fact, not science fiction, okay? Did I have another question? Go ahead, sir.
Was lasers part of Planter Gotham, or was it a different product?
The planter, yeah.
Was it part of Planter Gotham?
I don't know that term, but it was a planter product, so I'm sure that it evolved out of that process over the number of years. They've been looking at it. Interpol's been looking at some of those things. They want to spin this technology off to their 190 different partners in different countries and things like that. So apparently it's doing things they like.
The product packages, so it's like if you're out of national security, you'll end up with one version.
Right, yeah, what they disclose to you is different based on your level. Yeah. It's right in there somehow, whatever they're naming it. So, okay. All right, so there's a couple things going on right here in the good old U.S. of A., home of the free. Well, let's look at some other parts of the world, because there's always China. Okay, China's got this thing going. You're going to love this. China's got this plan to create an all-encompassing social credit score to keep tabs on its citizens and their activities, and it's due to be in place by 2020. So even if you don't engage in political activities, it doesn't mean you're spared. Last September, they started using tests of this. The idea is that once you break the trust, restrictions start to be imposed on you. The score can be influenced by financial transactions, political and social behavior, general lifestyle, and basically everything you do today. So it's like a grading system for your population. Now you're deciding what's the proper way to behave. Okay? So they want to have that in place by 2020. All right? Well, now in the meantime, they're not that far off. Okay? Aside from being 2 years away, most of the information the government needs for doing the score is already being collected by companies like Alipay, which is the Chinese version of PayPal. That restaurant bill you didn't pay on time, that day you came to work a few minutes late, the fact your doctor said you shouldn't start smoking, you didn't. All sorts of personal information that's in the hands of WeChat and its competitors. All this stuff can be moved into and collected because in China, there's no constitution. They don't have the personal rights. They have the right to do whatever they think they want to, and they seem to be pretty good at doing a lot of that. So the score is also influenced by your hobbies. So interaction with friends, shopping habits, lifestyle. And the higher the score that you get, the more privileges you get in Alipay services, or you may get fast-tracked if you need a visa or you want to rent a car. You'll get privileges to that, whereas if your score gets lower, you'll get more and more restrictions. So that seems like way beyond the credit score idea, all right? Way beyond the credit score idea. I mean, I can live with the credit score. If I have a shitty credit score, okay, fine, I can't get that loan, but I can still do everything else. In this case, it starts to encroach on the freedoms in your life and tries to direct your behavior and punish bad behavior according to the powers that be, and of course reward good behavior for those that follow the party line. So I find these things a little bit concerning. Anyway, so this technology can quickly move around the world because technology can quickly be exported. So you have to watch that these sorts of things don't become part of other totalitarian or oppressive regimes to further limit the movements and the freedoms of their people. So, okay, so we got an idea what people like about privacy and how they perceive that. We talked a little bit about some of the current laws that are affecting that, some for good and some for not so good. And we looked at a few things that are going on in the world as far as potential threats by activities by large corporations, data collecting, and or their partners with law enforcement and federal agencies. And we've looked at the situation in China. So now, this is all science fact. Now, where might things go in the future, and what concerns should we have about some of that? Okay? So let's think about that for a second. Technology is moving along very quickly. Google, artificial intelligence, those things are becoming more and more useful. The badges, we're talking to Siri. I mean, 10 years ago, thinking that you're talking to something and it's giving you answers that are somewhat meaningful, it's totally science fiction. And yet today, it's science fact. All right? So with some of those things coming along, where might we want to exercise some concerns about the future? Well, hey, something popular, self-driving cars, right? So with automated vehicles, for them to work, they've got to snag all kinds of data about the world around them. I mean, pretty much they're just little data factories. They got scanners, they got sensors, they got it all going on. They got infrared, they got LiDAR. They're collecting information all around to know what's happening around them, who's moving close, who's moving away, what's happening wherever. And there's no real laws in place that say how long they're supposed to keep this data for. So essentially, they can keep it forever. And because all these things are being captured, if you're doing some sort of investigation for the federal government's doing, imagine they could go, hey, give me the history of this car, everywhere it's been, all the things it's done. I mean, you could have a little video showing you all that and seeing where these things are. Maybe there's an accident at an intersection. We couldn't get it because it was not an autonomous vehicle that had the crash, but there were AVs around. And so we can look at the sensors and the data that was collected by those and see what was happening there as well. So, and obviously things are going to go more towards the self-driving automated vehicles. I think, on a side note, I think that's probably one thing that'll improve traffic here in LA is if they can automate the cars. You won't have this bumper tag and stuff. They'll all line up and go happily down the road for a while. So maybe there's a benefit to that. I joke with people saying that, if you have kids now, by the time they grow up to get their driver's license, it's just going to be an app. You're just going to get in the car and go, take me to grandma's, and it's going to go there. More cars now, it's harder now to buy a car with a stick shift. If you get a BMW or a Porsche or whatever, you can do that, but that's less and less the thing, moving more and more towards, four-wheel tech and more autonomy so that, we can be busy Snapchatting and Googling things in the back seat while we're going to grandma's. So it's kind of, it's all changing. Yes, sir?
What if you post an unpopular opinion
Yeah, that could be the next. Yes, go directly to jail now. Lock the doors.
To go back a second on you're talking about the social, or the construction of the social network that they're trying to do in China right now.
Right.
There's actually early Chinese entrepreneurs who are setting up systems to essentially offer you a black market system to game that system.
Oh, sure. I wouldn't doubt that. I mean, the black market rises up to deal with injustice everywhere. Really, yeah. But, you bring up an interesting point. Look, if we're surveilling everybody, we know that, Johnny Chan, the triad kid, is hopped in his AV, and we want to get him. The AV locks its doors, drives into the police station. I mean, it's possible. It's certainly possible. Is that entrapment? Well, not in China, because they don't have those kind of laws. When it comes here, yeah, it'll be an add-on to the Cloud Act somehow, I'm sure. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Say, how about this? Speaking of Siri, voice recognition. Well, isn't it cool? So, imagine this. Imagine this for a moment. A criminal. His face is hidden, he's recorded by a security camera, and he's threatening one of his victims, but we can't see his face. So, or a monitored phone conversation between a suspected terrorist or drug trafficker, or someone between them and someone pulling the strings, the big kingpin. Okay? 100% voice recognition would be a game changer. Okay? Although it can be presented as legal evidence, there's still a lot of skepticism about its applicability. But, happily enough, the EU has funded a program called Speaker Identification Integrated Project, and they're trying to get around that. What they've basically done here is created a speaker identification engine that utilizes audio tracks from phone intercepts, legal phone intercepts, social media posts, anywhere you can get the people's sounds, and creates this database, and then starts to put together a way to identify those individuals based on known things and their voice patterns. And you can imagine now that this can really accelerate, because if you consider artificial intelligence, Google's artificial intelligence implementation is largely what's known as a neural network. Neural networks are really good for recognizing patterns and things that are close to that pattern. So it's like, yes, that's similar, it must be the same guy. And they're offering this as a service. So, a lot of development could easily be done utilizing the capabilities that they have and enhancing this whole thing to make it extremely effective, where you could literally, like a fingerprint, feed the voice into a database and come back with the face. And back to China once more, because they're just so much fun. It's not the new Google Glass. It's the new police Google Glass. Now, here you see a police officer in a Beijing station with a facial recognition glass. This system is hooked into a back-end database that contains individual personal details, name, gender, address, lots of other things. So as they're scanning the crowd, this information is coming up, and they've made a number of arrests of people. They've done this in stadiums. They did recently in a big rock concert in China. They arrested several people that they'd been looking for, that the face recognition camera spotted. Not all of them are on the ground level like this officer. They're also installing cameras, up on poles in the major cities. They're usually up about 10 feet or so, so they're not in your direct line of sight, yet gives them a great view of your face and your movements. So it's kind of Big Brother-ish. Makes it pretty tough. Okay? So, that's exciting. Okay, I got another one for you here. Let me give you a hint on the next one. Zombies love this. Brains. That's right, brains. We're talking brain scans here. Yes, folks, brain scans are a thing. There's a technique known as electroencephalography. I think I got that right. EEG for short. Okay? And the EEG stuff, you put a cap on, it's got some sensors around your head, picking up that stuff, picking up those brain patterns. Well, there's a well-known thing called the P300 wave, okay? And so here's the deal with P300. P300 gets fired off, kicks off when you see or hear something you recognize, okay? So imagine this scenario. You got a suspected bank robber, and you're showing a picture of the getaway car, and P300 goes off. Is that incrimination? Okay? So you could do that with a lot of situations. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So the idea of your biometric becoming a testimonial thing, well, if it's testimonial, there's a lot of protections in the law that should apply. You can't be forced to testify against yourself, for example. But if it's not, if it's just physical evidence, well, you can't refuse to give your fingerprints. So it's a little bit iffy. Which way is this going to go? And I also know that there's researchers that are doing work on trying to read your mind with brain scans, okay? Whether they can pull a sentence out of that or they can pick emotions or other sorts of things, whether they'll ever get to the point of making it a shape, who knows? But certainly, like I said, 10 years ago, talking to this thing, to Siri, would seem like science fiction. This stuff moves pretty fast sometimes. So, something to be aware of. You can't just fear the zombies alone. All right, so I got another one for you here. Okay, I think this needs there's supposed to be a flux capacitor here down in the middle somewhere, I believe. I don't know, does anyone recognize this or know what this is? Yes, sir. What's your guess? This is a quantum computer. This is IBM's Q1. It's a quantum computer. Unlike our binary-based systems of today, quantum computing is in another dimension. And these machines this is not the type of thing that you'll be using for surfing the web or doing a little word processing, taking selfies, that kind of thing. No, this is made to solve specific types of complex problems. But one of those things happens to be cryptography. And it is said that this type of computer, quantum computing, can break encryption in the blink of an eye. It's like it doesn't exist. Okay? It's a thing of terrifying beauty. Now, that means we've got to change things. Does that mean that, when this thing comes out, well, it's probably be expensive. I don't know if I can get one for, to use, but I would say that, maybe I can find those lost bitcoins with it. There might be a reason to do this. Maybe I can get time sharing on Google with it. Maybe it's a web share. Amazon Web Services could have one. That would be nice. But anyway, so encryption will fundamentally change because the level of its protection is going to change. Now, what are you going to do? Well, there's a new type of encryption. There's a different type of encryption. It's called lattice field. And that's kind of the new hotness. That's supposed to be resistant to quantum computing breaking it. So we might see things going in a new direction there as well. Okay? All right. Well, what can you do after all this? Once again, it depends. Okay? You want to do a threat assessment? Who do you fear? Is it government? Is it cyber criminals? It depends. Who do you think is coming after you, and what should you do? Now, cybercrime vulnerabilities, that can be mitigated. Scams, ransomware, espionage, things like that. The government stuff might be a little tougher. So if we look at scams and cons and cybercrime, it's a best practices thing, right? Have an antivirus, have a firewall, be aware of phishing attacks. You should know that all major breaches start probably with a phishing attack, okay? So you want to be aware of those. Backup, backup, backup. That's super important because it allows you to mitigate the damages, okay? This is all stuff we know, right? Keep the software updated, lower the vulnerabilities, be careful of what you share, don't click on links from strangers, and that kind of stuff, okay? So if you follow some basic sanitary computer practices, you can really minimize those threats, okay? However, the government, that's a little tougher. You're seriously outgunned here. Deleting your cookies is not going to be enough. In fact, coming from a forensic standpoint, deleting your cookies never really did that good because I can get them back. And a lot of other artifacts that are on your machine that you are not even aware that they exist. So you can't get rid of them. It's really that simple. So what can you do here? Well, using a VPN, Tor, you can try encrypted apps like Signal. Those are possible. You got to be careful about things that are stored in offshore servers, which used to be a great idea because you'd figure, hey, I'm outside the jurisdiction, I'm cool. Remember the Cloud Act? Not anymore. Not anymore. So offshore stuff, you got to make sure they don't keep logs. That's it. Okay, so beyond that, the best defensive weapon you possess is your brain. And you want to educate and improve users' ability and your own ability to defend themselves. So you learn about the scams, be able to avoid fake news, try to find legitimate media sites, not the troll sites that don't quote their sources, that don't do fact checks. I mean, they might be amusing, but really you're fooling yourself if you were going to rely on that for valid data. This is kind of cool. Fake news. www.getbadnews.com. Okay, so this is like a game of you get to put together a fake news campaign, an influence or misinformation campaign for people. And you walk through this thing, and it's kind of fun, and you do a number of little choices along the way to see how you want that, and it tells you this will work better than that. It's a lot of fun, it's good, and it's the type of thing that you can spread this to your friends and people that should know better. And it's a helpful little item to create an awareness of how these campaigns get put together, and hopefully someone will, look beyond just the picture on Facebook and find out that there's, nothing behind that. Okay. Now here's another item: secure drop. So if you have information from a whistleblower standpoint, you can submit it anonymously with this. This actually was something that was coded by the late hacker Aaron Schwartz. So he was involved in that, and it's now being managed by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. Okay? Another little item here is the American Civil Liberties Union has an app called Mobile Justice. And what this does is you can use this to record civil liberty violations or protests that are being oppressed, things like that. Why use this rather than your camera? The reason is with this, it goes directly to the ACLU lawyers, and so they have it. So if your gear gets taken or lost or whatever, that stuff is still in play there. And lately we've seen a lot of suggestion or suppression of legitimate protest movements. Certainly, I guess the most recent one was the NFL, where they decided to not allow their players to kneel during the national anthem. I suspect this will go to the Supreme Court because you can't make rules that infringe on the constitutional rights of whether an individual can express their First Amendment rights. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. So, all right, one other thing here. Here's an observation that's as relevant today as it was almost 250 years ago. General George Washington, father of our country, first president of the United States, reminds us that people must remain ever vigilant against tyrants masquerading as public servants. Now, our democracy is supposed to be by the people and for the people. And during our history, many have fought and suffered and died to protect those freedoms. Now, you don't have to pick up a gun, but you just can't sit on your butt and let the attacks on your rights with the government go unchallenged. So if you want to know where to start, if you want a place to begin with this, you should think about the American Civil Liberties Union, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. These are two organizations that have been working for decades to protect those rights. And if you want to know what's going on, subscribe to their feeds. You get notified of what's currently, how you can have your voice heard, and compel the government to do the right things. The takeaway here is, if you want personal privacy and you want personal security, you have to take it personally and get involved. So with that, I got one thing here. You're going to like this. Oops. Let's see. Let's see if it's going to play. No, come on, it's got to play for me.
What's your last name?
Is this going to play? No, yeah, no, this is a cool video. I want this to play here. Try and get it to go. I'm going to play it small because it's kind of cool. You like it. Okay. Oh, it's not coming up. All right, well, that's not going to work for me. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you learned some things. Be involved. Be the agent of change. And as a wise man once said, be the change you want to see in the world. Go forth and make a difference.